The gallows loomed in the distance, a stark silhouette against the crimson sunset that bled across the Montana sky as Clara Wilson stumbled through the dusty streets of Whiteridge. Her trembling hands pressed against her swollen belly, 6 months heavy with child, while tears carved clean tracks down her dirt-streaked face. The crowd that had gathered for the evening's auction parted before her, some averting their eyes in shame, others gawking with cruel curiosity at the pregnant woman being dragged to the auction block by Sheriff Donovan, a man whose badge gleamed as falsely as his promises of justice. $2. Sheriff Donovan bellowed, yanking Clara forward by her bound wrists. Starting bid for this woman is $2. Unwed, with child and nowhere to go, perfect for any man needing someone to cook, clean, or warm his bed. The year was 1875, and in Whiteridge, Montana territory, the law was whatever Sheriff Donovan declared it to be. Clara had arrived 3 weeks earlier, a widow seeking her cousin only to discover her last living relative had died of typhoid the previous winter. With her meager savings depleted and no respectable work available for her condition, the sheriff had found her sleeping in the livery stable and declared her a vagrant. "She's a burden on this town," Donovan continued, tightening his grip on Clara's arm. $2 or she spends 6 months in territorial prison. The child will go to the orphanage in Helena. Clara's legs nearly buckled beneath her. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the evening wind. "My husband died at Missionary Ridge. I'm a respectable woman." "I just need work until quiet," Donovan hissed, giving her a sharp tug that made her gasp. $2. Who'll give me $2 for this fine woman?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few drunken miners laughed and called out crude suggestions, but no hands were raised. Clara felt her last hope fading with the dying light, then a commanding voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "That's enough." The townsfolk parted as Yates Griffin strode forward, his spurs jingling with each purposeful step. At 32, he stood tall and weathered, his dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His reputation preceded him a successful rancher with the largest spread outside of town, a former Union cavalry officer, and a man who kept to himself. "This isn't legal, Donovan, even by territorial standards," Yates said, his voice level but carrying the weight of authority that made the sheriff's eyes narrow. "She's a vagrant, Griffin, got no money, no kin. Town can't support her charity cases." Yates's gaze shifted to Clara, taking in her torn dress, the way she protectively cradled her belly, the quiet dignity in her tear-stained face. Something stirred in him that he hadn't felt in years, not since the war had taken everything he'd once held dear. "How much to settle her debts to the town?" Yates asked, his hand moving to the leather pouch at his belt. The sheriff laughed. $2 is the starting bid, but I reckon the town's owed at least 20 for her room and board in the jail this past week." Without hesitation, Yates pulled out a small leather bag and emptied several gold coins into his palm. The crowd gasped as he counted out 4 $5 gold pieces and handed them to the sheriff. $20 in gold, Yates said firmly. "That covers any debts she might have incurred." "Now cut her loose." Sheriff Donovan's eyes gleamed with greed as he pocketed the coins. "She's yours then, do what you want with her." Yates stepped forward and gently cut the ropes binding Clara's wrists. She rubbed the raw skin, looking up at him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. What happens now?" she whispered. Yates removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders, the unexpected kindness bringing fresh tears to her eyes. "You're coming home with me, Mrs. Wilson, Clara Wilson." "Mrs. Wilson," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "I've got a proposition for you, but not here, not with these vultures watching." He glared at the sheriff and the now silent crowd. "My ranch is 2 miles out of town. You'll have a hot meal and a safe place to sleep tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements." Clara hesitated, her hand instinctively protective over her unborn child. "What kind of arrangements?" Yates looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "Honorable ones, you have my word." The crowd had begun to disperse, disappointed at the lack of spectacle. Sheriff Donovan spat in the dust. "Enjoy your purchase, Griffin." Yates turned to him, his voice low and dangerous. "She's not a purchase, Donovan, remember that." He led Clara to where his horse was hitched outside the saloon. With gentle hands, he helped her mount, then swung up behind her. As they rode out of town, Clara sat rigidly in front of him, afraid to relax against the solid warmth of his chest. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Griffin," she finally said as the town lights faded behind them. "Yates," he corrected, "and there's no need for thanks." What Donovan was doing wasn't right. No woman should be treated that way, especially not in your condition. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the distant howl of coyotes the only sounds in the vast Montana night. Clara's exhaustion finally overcame her fear, and she found herself leaning back against Yates's chest, her eyes growing heavy. "Almost there," Yates murmured as they crested a small rise. Below them, nestled in a protected valley, lay Griffin Ranch. The main house was larger than Clara had expected, with warm light glowing from several windows. A barn and several outbuildings were visible in the moonlight, and the distant shapes of cattle could be seen in the pastures. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, lantern held high. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Yates explained. "My housekeeper. She lives in town but stays over when I'm away." The older woman hurried forward as Yates helped Clara dismount. "Land sakes, Yates Griffin, who's this poor thing, Mrs.?" "Clara Wilson," Yates replied, steadying Clara as her legs trembled beneath her. "She's in need of shelter and a hot meal, Mrs. Abernathy, and perhaps a bath and some clean clothes." The housekeeper's keen eyes took in Clara's condition, the raw marks on her wrists and the exhaustion etched in her face. Without further questions, she took Clara's arm. "Come along, dear, let's get you settled." Clara looked back at Yates, who nodded encouragingly. "Go with Mrs. Abernathy. She'll take good care of you. We'll talk in the morning when you've rested." Too weary to argue, Clara allowed herself to be led inside. The house was warm and surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor rancher. Mrs. Abernathy guided her to a bedroom with a real feather mattress and clean linens, then disappeared momentarily, returning with a steaming bath in a copper tub. "Mr. Griffin had that indoor plumbing put in last year," the housekeeper explained proudly as she helped Clara undress. "One of the few ranches around here with such luxuries." As Clara sank into the warm water, tears of relief streamed down her face. Mrs. Abernathy pretended not to notice as she laid out a clean nightgown. "It belonged to Mr. Griffin's sister when she visited last summer," she explained. "It should fit well enough for now." "He has family?" Clara asked, curious about her rescuer. Mrs. Abernathy nodded as she poured a cup of broth for Clara. "Just the sister in St. Louis, lost his wife and baby son to fever back in '67, hasn't been the same since. Keeps to himself, works the ranch, reads his books. Good man, though, one of the best." After her bath, Clara ate a simple meal of broth and bread, too tired for the heartier stew Mrs. Abernathy offered. As she climbed into the clean bed, she heard voices downstairs, Yates and the housekeeper in quiet conversation. She strained to hear, catching only fragments. "Couldn't leave her there. What will people say? Doesn't matter." The child, their voices faded as sleep claimed her, her hand resting protectively over her unborn baby, wondering what tomorrow would bring in this stranger's home. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. Clara woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed in her own clothes, now clean and mended by Mrs. Abernathy's efficient hands, and made her way downstairs. Yates was seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee and a newspaper before him. He stood when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Wilson, I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Griffin." "Yates," he reminded her, pulling out a chair. "Please sit. Mrs. Abernathy has made breakfast." The housekeeper appeared with plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. Clara's stomach rumbled at the sight, reminding her how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Yates set down his fork and regarded her directly. "Mrs. Wilson, I need to speak plainly with you about your situation." Clara tensed, setting down her own fork. "Yes, of course." What Donovan did was wrong, but he wasn't entirely incorrect about one thing: this territory can be harsh on a woman alone, especially in your condition. Yates's voice was matter of fact, not unkind. You mentioned your husband died at Missionary Ridge. That was in '63, if I recall. Clara's cheeks flushed. Yes, Thomas died at Missionary Ridge, this child. She placed a protective hand over her belly. This child's father was a man I met in Denver. He promised marriage but disappeared when he learned I was with child. I came here looking for my cousin Martha, only to find she'd passed on. Yates nodded, his expression softening slightly at her honesty. I appreciate your candor. Here's my proposition: I need a wife. Clara nearly choked on her tea. Pardon? Not in the traditional sense, he clarified quickly. I need someone to help maintain this house, to provide a woman's touch to a place that hasn't had one in years. In return, I'm offering you my name, protection, and security for both you and your child. Clara stared at him in disbelief. You're proposing marriage to a woman you just met, a woman carrying another man's child, a marriage of convenience, Yates explained calmly. Your child would have my name, you would have the protection of my household, and I would have. He hesitated. Companionship of sorts. What sorts? Clara asked warily. Yates's expression remained serious. I'm not proposing to share your bed, Mrs. Wilson, if that's your concern. My wife died 8 years ago. I have no interest in replacing her in that way. What I'm offering is a partnership. You'd run the household, help with the accounts which I admittedly neglect, and in return, you and your child will want for nothing. Clara looked down at her plate, mind racing. The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Without funds or family, her options were severely limited. The territorial prison would likely mean death for her and her baby. Why would you do this for a stranger? She finally asked. Yates was quiet for a long moment. Because 8 years ago, I couldn't save my wife and son. Perhaps helping you and your child is a way to make amends for that failure. The raw honesty in his voice made Clara's throat tighten. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he replied simply. We can be married today by the justice of the peace in town. It won't be much of a ceremony, but it will be legal. Today, Clara's eyes widened. The sooner your position here is legitimized, the less gossip there will be, Yates explained practically. People already saw me take you from town last night. If we wait, your reputation, what's left of it, will suffer further. Clara considered his words. The man before her was a stranger, yet he had shown her more kindness in one night than she had experienced in months of wandering. His home was comfortable, his proposition honorable. And most importantly, her child would have a name, security, a future. Yes, she said quietly. I accept your proposal, Mr. Griffin. Yates, he corrected for the third time, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly in what might have been the beginning of a smile. If we're to be married, you should use my given name. That afternoon, in the small office of Justice Sullivan, Clara Wilson became Clara Griffin. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, witnessed only by Mrs. Abernathy and the justice's clerk. Yates had purchased a simple gold band from the general store, which felt strange and heavy on Clara's finger. As they rode back to the ranch, now husband and wife in the eyes of the law, Clara felt a curious mix of relief and apprehension. She had secured safety for her child, but at what cost to her own dreams of love and companionship? Yates seemed to sense her thoughts. It won't be so bad, he said quietly as the ranch came into view. We may have married as strangers, but perhaps in time we can become friends. Clara nodded, trying to smile. I would like that. That night, true to his word, Yates showed her to what would be her bedroom, the same one she had slept in the night before, and bid her good night at the door. As she listened to his footsteps recede down the hall to his own room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, twisting the new gold band on her finger, wondering what strange twist of fate had brought her here, and what the future might hold with this solemn, honorable stranger who was now her husband. The first week of their unusual marriage passed in a blur of adjustments and discoveries. Clara took stock of the household, finding it well supplied but lacking organization. She discovered that Yates was an educated man with a substantial library, that he preferred coffee to tea, that he rose before dawn and often worked until sunset. and that he kept largely to himself even when at home. For his part, Yates observed his new wife with quiet curiosity. Clara proved herself capable and industrious, bringing order to spaces that had been neglected since his wife's death. She made no demands, asked for little, and seemed determined to earn her keep despite her advancing pregnancy. More than once, he found himself stepping in when she attempted tasks too strenuous for her condition. "You don't need to prove yourself," he told her firmly on the 8th day of their marriage when he found her attempting to move a heavy trunk in the attic. "Your presence here is justification enough," Clara had flushed, embarrassed at being caught. "I feel I should contribute more. You've given me so much and I've given nothing in return." Yates studied her for a moment, taking in the proud tilt of her chin, the determined set of her shoulders. "You've brought life back to this house," he finally said. "That's more than enough." Their interactions remained polite but distant, two strangers navigating the unfamiliar territory of their arrangement. They took meals together, exchanged pleasantries, and retreated to their separate rooms each night. It was a marriage in name only, just as Yates had promised. Everything changed on a stormy night 3 weeks after their wedding. Clara was awakened by a crash of thunder so powerful it shook the windows in their frames. Lightning illuminated her room in brief, brilliant flashes, revealing the sheets of rain lashing against the glass. As she lay trying to calm her racing heart, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a hoarse cry that was neither human nor animal, followed by ragged, desperate words she couldn't quite make out. Fear prickled along her spine as she slipped from bed, wrapping her robe tightly around her. The cry came again, louder this time, clearly coming from Yates's room down the hall. Without stopping to think, Clara hurried to his door and knocked. "Yates, are you all right?" No answer came, but she heard thrashing and another anguished cry. Heart pounding, Clara opened the door. Lightning flashed, illuminating Yates tangled in his bedsheets, his face contorted in agony as he fought some invisible enemy in his sleep. Sweat plastered his hair to his forehead, and his hands clutched at the air as if reaching for something or someone just beyond his grasp. Elizabeth. He cried out, "The baby! Save the baby!" Clara rushed to his side, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand on his shoulder. "Yates," she called softly. "Yates, wake up, you're dreaming." He jerked awake with a gasp, sitting bolt upright, eyes wild and unfocused. For a terrifying moment, Clara thought he might strike out, but recognition slowly dawned in his face. "Clara," his voice was rough, disoriented. "What, you were having a nightmare," she explained gently, stepping back to give him space. "I heard you calling out." Shame crossed his features as he ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I apologize, the storms sometimes." He trailed off, looking away. "Elizabeth was your wife?" Clara asked softly. Yates nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "She and our son died during a storm like this. I was away checking the herd by the time I returned." His voice broke. "The fever took them both before I could even say goodbye." Without thinking, Clara sat beside him on the bed, taking his trembling hand in hers. "I'm so sorry, Yates." He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face, illuminated by another flash of lightning. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier breaking, a connection forming where there had been only polite distance before. "I was a coward when I married you," he confessed, his voice low. "I thought I could keep you at arm's length, fulfill my obligation without risking my heart, but seeing you in this house, bringing warmth and life back to these rooms." He squeezed her hand. "I'm finding it harder than I expected." Clara's pulse quickened. "I don't understand." "I'm saying that our arrangement may become complicated for me." His eyes held her steadily. "You deserve to know that." Before Clara could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind slammed against the house, making the timbers groan. She flinched, and without hesitation, Yates put his arm around her shoulders. "Stay," he said quietly. "Just until the storm passes, we can sit up and talk or not talk, whatever you prefer." Clara knew she should refuse. That propriety demanded she return to her own room. But the warmth of his arm around her, the honest vulnerability in his eyes, and the howling storm outside made the decision for her. "I'll stay," she whispered. They sat together through the worst of the storm, sometimes talking in low voices about their pasts, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Clara told him about her childhood in Ohio, her brief marriage to Thomas Wilson, who had courted her for 3 weeks before marching off to war, and her ill-fated romance with the charming gambler who had left her with child and without recourse. Yates spoke of his years in the cavalry, the small ranch he'd inherited and transformed into one of the territory's most successful operations, and hesitantly, of Elizabeth and the son he'd held only twice before they were taken from him. As dawn broke and the storm finally moved eastward, Clara found herself drowsy, her head resting against Yates's shoulder. They had moved to sit with their backs against the headboard, a respectable distance still between them save for the point where her head touched his shoulder and his arm draped lightly around her. "You should get some rest," Yates murmured, his breath stirring her hair. Clara agreed sleepily, but made no move to leave. Yates chuckled, a warm, rusty sound that Clara realized she'd never heard before. "I'll wake you in an hour. The hands will be assessing storm damage and I should be out there." "Just a few minutes," Clara murmured, her eyes already closing. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows and she was alone in Yates's bed, tucked carefully under the covers. For a moment, panic seized her. Had she truly spent the night in his room? But the memory of their conversation, the innocent comfort they had shared, calmed her fears. On the bedside table was a folded note. Clara reached for it, recognizing Yates's neat, precise handwriting. "Clara, let yourself rest. Mrs. Abernathy has been told you're unwell after the storm and need quiet. I'll return by supper time." Clara ran her fingers over the words, a small smile playing at her lips. Something had changed between them during the night, something significant though difficult to define. They were no longer merely two strangers bound by a practical arrangement. They had become what? Friends, certainly, but perhaps the potential for something more had been revealed, like a vein of gold discovered unexpectedly in familiar ground. Over the following weeks, a subtle shift continued in their relationship. Yates no longer retreated to his study immediately after dinner but lingered at the table, discussing the day's events or ranch business with Clara. She found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the rare occasions when she could coax a smile or even rarer laugh from him. As her pregnancy advanced into its final months, Yates became increasingly attentive, ensuring she had everything needed for the baby's arrival. He surprised her by having his men convert a small room adjacent to her bedroom into a nursery, complete with a cradle he admitted to making himself. "You made this?" Clara asked in wonder, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I had time during the evenings," Yates replied with a shrug, though she could see he was pleased by her reaction. "I used to be handy with tools before. He didn't need to finish, before Elizabeth and the baby died, before grief had consumed his life. It's beautiful," Clara said softly. "Thank you." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Clara thought he might move closer, might even kiss her. But the sound of Mrs. Abernathy calling from downstairs broke the spell, and the moment passed. That night, lying alone in her bed, Clara placed her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within. For the first time since learning of her pregnancy, she felt truly hopeful about the future, not merely resigned or determined to endure, but genuinely hopeful. Whatever had begun between her and Yates, it felt like the promise of something good, something healing for them both. The baby came 3 weeks early, on a crisp October morning when the aspens on the mountainsides had turned to gold. Clara had been in the kitchen with Mrs. Abernathy, preserving the last of the garden's produce when the first pain gripped her. By midday, she was in the throes of labor, with Mrs. Abernathy sending one of the ranch hands galloping for both Yates, who was checking the northern pastures, and the midwife from town. Yates arrived first, his face pale with worry as he took the stairs 2 at a time. He hesitated at Clara's bedroom door, torn between propriety and concern. "Go to her," Mrs. Abernathy said firmly, pushing past him with fresh linens. "She's asking for you." Inside, Clara was pacing slowly between contractions, her face flushed and damp with perspiration. She looked up when Yates entered, relief flooding her features. "You came," she said, reaching for his hand. "Of course I came." He took her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. "The midwife is on her way." A contraction seized her then, and Clara gasped, doubling over. Without thinking, Yates supported her weight, murmuring encouragement as she breathed through the pain. When it passed, she looked up at him with determination in her eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of the pain, but what if I'm not a good mother? What if I can't do this alone?" "You're not alone," Yates said firmly, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Not anymore." Clara searched his face, finding only sincerity and something else, something that made her heart beat faster despite her pain. "Yates." Another contraction cut off her words, this one stronger than the last. Mrs. Abernathy bustled in, announcing the midwife had arrived. Yates reluctantly let go of Clara's hand, stepping back to allow the women to take over. "I'll be right outside," he promised. The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the evening, Clara's cries growing more frequent and intense as darkness fell. Yates paced the hallway, flinching at each sound of pain, memories of another childbirth, one that had ended in tragedy, threatening to overwhelm him. "Mr. Griffin," Mrs. Abernathy appeared in the doorway, her expression grave. "The midwife says the baby is turned wrong." "She's doing what she can, but—" Fear clutched at Yates's heart. "Will they be all right?" he demanded. "Clara and the baby," Mrs. Abernathy's hesitation told him everything. "She's asking for you." Inside the room, the air was thick with tension. The midwife worked between Clara's legs, her forearms slick with blood. Clara herself lay pale and exhausted against the pillows, her nightgown soaked with sweat. "Yates," she whispered when she saw him, extending a trembling hand. He was at her side in an instant, taking her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I'm here, Clara. You're going to be fine, both of you." Clara shook her head weakly. "If you have to choose, no," Yates interrupted fiercely. "No choices like that. You're both going to live." He turned to the midwife, his voice commanding. "Do whatever you need to do." The next hour was the longest of Yates's life. He held Clara's hand through each contraction, wiped her brow, murmured encouragement as she pushed with diminishing strength. When she began to slip into unconsciousness between pains, genuine terror seized him. "Clara, stay with me," he pleaded, cradling her face in his hands. "Please, Clara, I can't lose you too. I love you." The words had escaped before he could stop them, but he realized with perfect clarity that they were true. Somewhere in these months of living side by side, of navigating their unusual arrangement, he had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with Clara Wilson Griffin. Her eyes flickered open at his declaration, a faint smile touching her lips. "Say it again," she whispered. "I love you," he repeated, pressing his forehead to hers. "I love you, Clara. Please fight." Something changed in her expression, then a new determination kindling in her eyes. With renewed strength, Clara bore down with the next contraction, her scream of effort echoing through the room. "The head," the midwife cried. "I can see the head." 2 more pushes, and suddenly a different cry filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Yates looked up in wonder as the midwife lifted a tiny, red-faced infant. "A girl," she announced, quickly wiping the baby clean and placing her on Clara's chest. "A healthy baby girl." Clara's tears mingled with laughter as she gazed down at her daughter. "Look what we did," she murmured, glancing up at Yates. "Isn't she beautiful?" Yates stared at the tiny face, so perfect despite the ordeal of her birth, and felt something inside him break open, all the grief and fear and loneliness of 8 years washing away in the flood of love for this woman and this child who were not his by blood, but had somehow become his by heart. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek, "just like her mother." Later, with Clara and the baby cleaned and resting comfortably, Yates sat beside the bed, reluctant to leave even for a moment. The midwife and Mrs. Abernathy had finally departed, leaving the new family alone in the quiet of the night. "Did you mean it?" Clara asked softly, her eyes on his face. "What you said during the birth," Yates met her gaze steadily. "Every word, I love you, Clara." "I think I have for months, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." "Because of Elizabeth, partly," he acknowledged. "But also because of our arrangement. I didn't want you to feel obligated or trapped. You married me for security, not love." Clara shifted slightly, wincing at the movement to take his hand. "I married you for security," she agreed, "but I've stayed for so much more." She looked down at their sleeping daughter, then back at him. I love you too, Yates Griffin. I think I have since that night during the storm. Yates brought her hand to his lips. I want to be a real husband to you, Clara, and a father to this little one if you'll have me. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I want that more than anything. Gently, mindful of her exhaustion, Yates leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in their first kiss, tender, reverent, and full of promise. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. What shall we name her? He asked, looking down at the sleeping infant. Clara didn't hesitate. Hope, she said softly, because that's what she's brought us, Hope Elizabeth Griffin. Yates's breath caught at the middle name. Elizabeth, to honor the past while embracing our future, Clara explained. Is that all right? In answer, Yates kissed her again, his heart so full he thought it might burst. It's perfect, he whispered against her lips. Just like our family. As winter settled over Montana territory, life at Griffin Ranch took on a new rhythm centered around little Hope. The baby thrived under the devoted attention of her parents, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Clara recovered quickly from the birth, regaining her strength and embracing her new roles as mother and true wife. For Yates, the transformation was even more profound. The ranch hands whispered in amazement at the change in their once taciturn boss, who now smiled freely, and was sometimes even heard singing to the baby as he carried her around the property. The grief that had defined him for 8 years hadn't vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by new joy, new purpose. Their marriage bed, once separate by mutual agreement, became a place of tender discovery as they explored their love for each other. Clara found in Yates a gentle, passionate partner who cherished her body and spirit with equal devotion. For his part, Yates marveled daily at the miracle of second chances, at the way life could begin anew even after the deepest loss. The first real test of their newfound happiness came in early December, when Sheriff Donovan rode out to the ranch unannounced. Clara was in the kitchen with Hope sleeping in a basket nearby when she heard the sheriff's voice in the yard. Fear, instinctive and immediate, sent her heart racing as she gathered Hope protectively in her arms. Through the window, she watched Yates step forward to intercept Donovan before he could approach the house. The two men stood facing each other, Yates's posture tense and defensive. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Yates asked, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Donovan dismounted slowly, his gaze moving past Yates to the house. "Heard congratulations were in order. Baby born a mite early, wasn't she? Barely 7 months after your hasty wedding." "My family is none of your concern," Yates replied evenly. "State your business or leave my property." "Now, don't get your back up, Griffin," Donovan said with a smirk. "Just doing my duty, making sure all's proper with the good citizens of my jurisdiction. Some folks in town been talking, is all. Wondering about the timing, wondering if maybe that gold you paid was for more than just settling debts." Clara saw Yates's hands clench into fists at his sides. "Choose your next words carefully, Donovan." The sheriff raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant. Just saying appearances matter in these parts. Would be a shame if rumors started about your new wife's virtue or about the legitimacy of that baby." In 2 swift strides, Yates closed the distance between them, seizing Donovan by the front of his coat. "That baby is my daughter, legally and in every way that matters. And Clara is my wife, deserving of every respect. If I hear that you or anyone else in town has spoken a word against either of them, you'll answer to me. Is that clear?" Donovan's smirk faltered at the cold fury in Yates's eyes. "Just passing along what I've heard, Griffin. No need for threats." "It's not a threat," Yates said quietly, releasing the sheriff's coat. "It's a promise. Now get off my land." Clara waited until Donovan had ridden away before stepping onto the porch, Hope bundled against the cold in her arms. Yates turned at the sound of the door, his face softening immediately at the sight of them. "You heard," he said, climbing the steps to join them. Clara nodded, leaning into his embrace as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "He can't hurt us, can he?" "No," Yates assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But his visit made me realize something. We've been so focused on ourselves, on Hope, that we've neglected something important." "What's that?" Clara asked, looking up at him. "Introducing my wife and daughter to society properly." Yates replied with a determined smile. I think it's time we attended church in town, perhaps hosted a dinner for some of the neighboring ranchers and their wives. Let everyone see that the Griffins are a united family, proudly facing the world together. Clara considered his words. Since their wedding, they had kept largely to themselves, partly due to her pregnancy and Hope's birth, but also from a desire to protect their fragile new happiness from outside scrutiny. But Yates was right, hiding away only fueled speculation. I'd like that, she decided. And perhaps we could host a Christmas gathering here at the ranch. Show everyone our home, introduce Hope properly. The smile that lit Yates's face warmed her more effectively than the winter sun. That's my brave Clara, he said proudly, always facing challenges head-on. The Christmas gathering became Clara's mission over the following weeks. She threw herself into preparations with characteristic determination, baking, decorating, and arranging every detail with care. Invitations were sent to neighboring ranchers, business associates, and even townspeople who had shown kindness during Clara's brief stay in Whiteridge. To their surprise and delight, nearly every invitation was accepted. On Christmas Eve, Griffin Ranch welcomed more guests than it had seen in a decade. The house gleamed with lamplight and greenery, while delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen where Mrs. Abernathy presided over an army of temporary helpers. Clara, dressed in a new green gown that Yates had ordered specially from Helena, stood beside her husband in the foyer as they greeted their guests. Hope, resplendent in a white christening gown, was passed from admiring arms to admiring arms, her chubby cheeks and bright eyes charming even the most skeptical visitors. Mrs. Griffin, the baby is absolutely darling, declared Mrs. Sullivan, the justice's wife. She has her father's eyes, don't you think? Clara exchanged a quick glance with Yates, who smoothly replied, We think she favors her mother, though perhaps she has my stubbornness. The evening progressed with surprising ease. Clara, who had feared judgment or cold shoulders, instead found herself welcomed by most of the community's women. Many brought small gifts for Hope and offered friendship to the newcomer in their midst. They've accepted you, Yates murmured during a quiet moment as they watched their guests enjoying the holiday feast. As I knew they would, Clara squeezed his hand. They've accepted us as a family, that's what matters. As the evening drew to a close, Yates surprised everyone by calling for attention. Standing before the fireplace with Clara and Hope beside him, he raised his glass. I want to thank you all for sharing this Christmas with us, he began. Many of you have known me for years, through good times and difficult ones. A murmur of understanding rippled through the crowd. You've watched me withdraw from life after losing Elizabeth and our son. Some of you tried to draw me back into the community with varying degrees of success. Gentle laughter acknowledged this truth. What you're witnessing tonight isn't just a Christmas celebration, Yates continued, his voice deepening with emotion. It's a resurrection of sorts. This past year has taught me that grief doesn't have to be the end of joy, that love can find us when we least expect it or deserve it. He turned to Clara, taking her free hand in his. When I paid gold for Clara that night in town, I thought I was offering safety to a woman in need. I had no idea that I was the one being rescued. His voice broke slightly. She and Hope have brought light back into my life, and I will spend the rest of my days thanking God for that miracle. Clara blinked back tears as a chorus of hear, hear, and raised glasses met Yates's words. As the guests applauded, Yates leaned down and kissed her gently, a public declaration of their love that left no room for doubt or speculation. Later that night, with the guests departed and Hope sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Clara and Yates stood before the dying embers of the fire, arms around each other. Did you mean what you said? Clara asked. About being rescued? Yates nodded, drawing her closer. Before you came into my life, I was existing, not living, going through the motions, letting grief and guilt define me. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. You taught me to look forward instead of back. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. When that auction began, I thought my life was over. I never imagined it was just beginning. We've come a long way from $2 and a desperate bargain, Yates agreed, a smile in his voice. And the gold coins you paid, Clara reminded him. Don't forget those. Yates tipped her face up to his. Best investment I ever made, he murmured, before capturing her lips in a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future bright with possibility. Spring came early to Montana that year, bringing with it new growth and fresh beginnings. Hope took her first steps in April, toddling determinedly from Clara to Yates across the parlor rug, her face alight with triumph. By summer, she was chattering in a language only she fully understood, though both parents claimed to comprehend her perfectly. The transformation of Griffin Ranch continued as well. Under Clara's guidance, the gardens were expanded, the house redecorated room by room, and the social isolation that had characterized Yates's life for so long gradually gave way to measured engagement with neighbors and community. Clara found unexpected fulfillment in her role as Yates's partner in the ranch business. Her head for figures and organizational skills complemented his practical knowledge of cattle and land management. Together, they expanded operations, investing in new breeding stock and additional acreage when opportunities arose. Their personal happiness deepened as well, their love maturing from the tentative beginnings of that stormy night to a solid, sustaining bond built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and passionate affection. They developed the comfortable shorthand of long-married couples, anticipating each other's needs, finishing each other's sentences, exchanging glances that conveyed paragraphs of meaning. In late summer, as Hope approached her first birthday, Clara discovered she was expecting again. When she shared the news with Yates, his reaction, stunned joy followed by tender concern, confirmed what she already knew. This man who had once offered marriage as a business arrangement had become the loving husband of her dreams. "Are you happy?" she asked as they lay together in the aftermath of their celebration of the news. Yates gathered her close, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Beyond words," he murmured. "Every day with you and Hope has been a gift, and now another child." He shook his head in wonder. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would have all this, I wouldn't have believed it possible." "I wouldn't have believed it either," Clara admitted, thinking back to those desperate days before Yates had entered her life. "Sometimes I still can't believe how fortunate we are." Their contentment was briefly shadowed in the fall when news reached them that Sheriff Donovan had been killed in a gunfight with a wanted outlaw. Though neither Clara nor Yates could muster genuine grief for the man who had treated her so callously, they attended the funeral out of respect for the office he had held. Strange to think that without his cruelty, we might never have found each other, Clara reflected as they rode home afterward. Yates nodded thoughtfully. "I prefer to think we would have found our way to each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." As Hope's first birthday approached, they planned a small celebration with Mrs. Abernathy and a few close friends. The night before the party, Clara found Yates in the nursery watching their daughter sleep, a wrapped package in his hands. "What's that?" she asked, slipping her arm around his waist. Yates showed her a small wooden box, beautifully crafted and polished to a high sheen. "I made this for Hope. Inside is the gold I paid for you that night, the 4 $5 coins. I've had them set into a pendant for her to wear when she's older." Clara opened the box to find a delicate gold pendant suspended on a fine chain, the coins arranged in a flower pattern. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But why?" "So she'll always know the value of her mother," Yates said simply. "And the story of how our family began." Clara closed the box, too moved to speak for a moment. "We'll tell her the truth when she's old enough to understand," she decided. About Thomas, about her birth father. But also about the man who chose to be her father in all the ways that truly matter. Yates kissed her gently. "We'll tell her that love creates families in all sorts of unexpected ways, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies." The following day, as they celebrated Hope's birthday with cake and presents, Clara looked around at the home and family they had built together in just over a year. From the lowest point in her life, pregnant, penniless, and publicly humiliated on that auction block, she had found her way to this moment of perfect contentment. Across the room, Yates caught her eye and smiled, the special smile he reserved just for her. In that smile was everything they had become to each other. Savior and saved, partner and lover, friend and family. As evening fell and their guests departed, Clara and Yates stood on the porch, Hope sleeping against her father's shoulder, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Yates's free arm encircled Clara's expanding waistline, feeling the subtle movements of their second child. 2 years ago today, he said quietly, I was alone in this house, convinced that my chance for happiness had died with Elizabeth and our son. Now look at us. Clara leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. From $2 to all of this, she mused. It seems impossible. Not impossible, Yates corrected gently. Miraculous. As they turned to go inside, Clara paused for one last look at the twilight landscape of the ranch, their home, their legacy to Hope and the child to come. The vast Montana sky stretched above them, painted in shades of indigo and gold, a fitting canopy for the life they had built from desperation and chance, from grief and hope, from a hasty bargain that had blossomed into enduring love. Come inside, wife, Yates murmured, holding the door open with his free hand. Tomorrow is waiting. Clara smiled and stepped across the threshold into the warm light of home, leaving the shadows of the past behind. In the years that followed, the Griffin family continued to flourish, their story becoming something of a legend in the growing community around Whiteridge. Hope was joined by a brother, James Yates Griffin, born healthy and strong on a clear spring morning. 2 years later, twin girls Elizabeth and Martha completed their family, bringing joyful chaos to the ranch house that had once stood so silent and empty. As the children grew, so did the ranch operations under Yates and Clara's careful stewardship. What had been a successful but modest enterprise expanded into one of the territory's largest cattle operations, providing employment for dozens of hands and contributing significantly to the region's development. Clara, once so vulnerable and alone, became a respected figure in the community, using her influence to establish the territory's first proper school and organizing assistance for other women in difficult circumstances. She never forgot what it was like to stand on that auction block, and her experiences shaped her into an advocate for those without voice or protection. Yates, meanwhile, served 2 terms as territorial representative, helping to shape the laws that would eventually govern Montana as it transitioned from territory to statehood. His experiences with Sheriff Donovan's abuse of power informed his particular interest in legal reforms and civil protections. But their greatest achievement remained their family and the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. Each year on their anniversary, Yates presented Clara with a small gold coin to add to her collection, a reminder of the 4 coins that had purchased not just her freedom, but the chance for both of them to build a new life from the ashes of their separate sorrows. On their 25th anniversary, with their children grown and the first grandchildren beginning to arrive, Yates and Clara stood once more on the porch of the ranch house, looking out over the land that had witnessed their journey. Would you do it all again? Yates asked, his hair now fully silver but his eyes still bright with love when they looked upon his wife. Knowing everything that lay ahead, Clara, still beautiful at 50, her auburn hair streaked with dignified gray, considered the question. Even the auction block, the shame and fear. Yates nodded, all of it if it brought us here. Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as they had done countless times over the years. In a heartbeat, she said softly, every moment led us here. How could I regret any step of that journey? In the gathering dusk, they turned together toward the warm light of their home, where family waited to celebrate with them. Behind them stretched the vast Montana landscape, before them lay whatever adventures the future still held. But in that moment, between past and future, they paused to acknowledge the miraculous, present a love that had begun with $2 and 4 gold coins, but had proven itself priceless beyond measure.